You see, one thing is I can live with doubt and uncertainty and not knowing. I think it's much more interesting.
I want to start out this video saying that some people have bards that sing the tale of, their adventures. We have Ryu, and Ryu makes decals of just our adventures, and he has released a free pack, which I'll have the link in the description. There's some really cool decals. I actually went ahead and re-rendered the thumbnails to make them actually a little bit more poppier for the purposes of this demonstration. However, I am proud to be using these and just slapping them around. It's just a fun time to be had, and just letting you know that it's a thing to just go and give a try. So with that off the screen, we'll press T to bring up the T panel. And the first thing I want to point out with this hops is that by hovering over the button, it will now tell you the version to the underscore, which this is still 985 underscore 24. And if you hover over the active tool, it will also give you the information on the version number, so that way you know exactly which version number you have installed. If you press Q in the Hardops Q menu, it will also have that information at the top of your Q menu, and if you press Shift Q, because you're one of those Pi people, it will also have it at the top of your Pi menu. So just for starters, you can also expand on the button, and just the first button, just clicking on the version number, will give you the about information of it, as far as the authors, the specific version, the version name, just in case you want to just display credits on the screen. It seemed like credits was one of those things that we probably should have made at some point, so I'm proud to announce that that's now as a part of Hardops. So this update is now out now, so without further ado, let's go ahead and get into it. So here we are using Blender, and we see that Hardops needs to be updated. By hovering over the button, if it just says hops, that means that you're not on the latest one yet. Same with the tooltip. So we'll go under our preferences and uninstall the previous. So first I'll uncheck it, then I will remove, and then I will choose install from file. And we'll just jump over to where I have it installed or downloaded, and we'll just choose to install. We'll wait a few seconds, and here it is. So after enabling it, we can see that it gives us a little bit of an issue. So first thing I would do is just close Blender. And of course, under my Blender is always another Blender. But let's go ahead and reopen the Steam version again, because I'm sure this is an issue that many people run into. So I wanted to kind of create an issue so that we could discuss it live. And so we'll go back in prefs and enable it. And we see that a close reopen is all that's needed. So there's not a need to particularly nuke your prefs or anything like that. That's the more heavy-handed approach. But when in doubt, always close and reopen. So now if we hover over the hops button, we can see that it specifies that you're using hops 985 underscore 24, which is this version. Hardops 9 Neodymium Max. We're still on Neodymium. And if you hover over the hops icon, you can see that it also displays the same information. I wanted to begin taking steps towards making hops even more informative, towards letting people know exactly which version they're using, which underscore, so that even in support issues, they can be very specific. In addition to that, there's also a button where if you happen to click it, it will display about information, as far as just the first names that are in the about section of the add-on. But there is, of course, a very large list because it is a team project. But this version, I would say, is definitely the remastered intended version of what we wanted 985 to be. And so without further ado, let's go ahead and go over what's new and what's different. Hopefully over the course of the last release, users have been able to get used to the Alt-V viewport adjustment system, where you can just adjust your viewport and rotate it around while also pressing X and S and A in order to switch through your environments. On top of that, you can also press plus and minus and the arrow keys in order to change it. You can press X in order to adjust your strength, opacity, rotation, and blur if you're using 2.83 and later. This has been expanded multifold in the later versions. However, before we continue, I just want to make sure that what I'm about to discuss is basically custom HDRI support. So instead of just loading all my favorite HDRs inside of Blender, I went through and searched for what's called the EMVs, which are these low-res JPEGs of the environments that I've collected over the years. And I grabbed all the smallest ones that were environments and just put them in a folder and used those, because using full-size HDRs turned out to be slightly detrimental to the performance of the tool and possibly could result in crashing. So I'm just letting you know that you can actually go on sites like SIBL, download their HDRs, and there's always an ENV that's able to be used for things like look dev adjustment. So without further ado, let's continue. Of course, we'll just minimize Blender, and under my Blender is another Blender, because that's just how I roll. Over here I'm using the Moto theme, and if we go to lights, you can see that I actually installed all those small JPEG images as HDRs. So that means that if I were to press Alt-VV, I can jump into look dev mode, and when I press X, I'm able to jump through all of the custom HDR environments, which was a very popular request at the time that this was initially created. So there's just something very relaxing about switching through environments and just pressing X and just moving your mouse back and forth and just seeing your roll, kind of like a commercial in action. But I'm happy to announce that this has finally been added. It was something that was kind of long requested since the beginning. However, the first step was definitely being able to scroll through environments in general. So I'm very proud of Lou for being able to finally pull off this accomplishment. So when the accomplishment of pressing Alt-VV and being able to look at all your custom environments was a big enough accomplishment, I had the request of being able to press R and actually set it to render. So that means if I were to click, this has now been set to the render view. So all that you see in this view right now has been set to render view, aside from the blur, which is something that needs to be done on the camera side. But even the rotation has been mapped from the look dev to the render, meaning that I could simply just press Q, add a camera, and press F12, and the result that I get is exactly what I was looking at, aside from, of course, the depth of field, which would need to be implemented. This idea, of course, stems from the idea that, there's something fun about look dev. So we wanted to be able to jump into look dev, just configure your scene, and then press R and set it to render. And then we could just jump in camera view, press F12, and the result that we get is exactly what we're seeing in the viewport. For the purposes of this example, I actually downgraded Hardops real fast, so you can tell because I don't have any tooltip information. We'll just select the cube and delete it, and I'll press Ctrl-V to actually paste my next example in the scene, which is in the Blender underneath this one. So first I'll select everything, and I just want to remind everyone that evict is great, because I just Ctrl-V pasted this cube which had all its cutters in the wrong collection, and now they're placed in something a little bit more logical. So the purpose of this example is to just show you that the previous material scroll would literally scroll all of the objects in the selection to the same color. And I found this to be a little bit not random enough. So a lot of work has been done on the new material scroll, so let's just jump over and take a look at that. We have the same example, and I will select this cube and we'll have an active selection, and with Alt-M we will control click in order to blink material scroll, and you can see that we are getting just random per object indexes. And I can press tab and you can see what results we're getting in the render. And I just love just taking these things and just scrolling them until I get something I like. I'll go ahead and just click, and we'll select this one on the side, and I'll press Alt-M, Control click to jump into material scroll, and we'll just start jumping through some combinations. Because I'm in render only mode, I actually selected the wrong piece. This is the one I want. And you might be wondering, what about color? So we press H and expand on our help, and we see that there's an option for pressing C to actually implement color. So I love just rolling around until I find a nice accent color, and then I can just select another piece, such as, well, I was going to select that one in the back, but that would actually override it with too much yellow. I could select this piece, even though I can't see anything, just jump into general material scroll, and I could just scroll through combinations until I find that hot yellow that I want to put on this thing. And so now I can press Alt-H, bring back the floor, and we can just select the floor, and control click material scroll and just scroll through infinite random combinations until we get something that we like, something that's, you know, a little more reflective, and then we could press Alt DV in order to just run our viewport around and press S and A in order to jump through various combinations until we find something that we like. And let's say this is exactly what we're going for. I could press R in order to set it to render, and then we click to apply, and now the render is actually being set to this. If we jump over to the render view, we can now see that we are just ready to rock and roll. If I press F12, that's all there is to it. So material scroll V2, there's a lot more to it than that, but I just wanted to just kind of give you a cursory overview of what to expect with it and how you can just quickly use it to just get some very nice materials for your hard surface creation. At the same time that Loof was preparing this new material scroll, ST3 was working on a concept to kind of accentuate things that just sort of fell into place. Something a little powerful, almost was afraid to release it, but without further ado, with nothing selected, we'll just click on the Hops button and choose blank light, and now we can actually begin scrolling through random combinations of lights until we find a combination that we like. So I wanted to show the 3D viewport at the same time so that way you could see what's going on as you scroll through blank lights in addition to what the render result is getting. So we'll just do that again, and we're just scrolling through combinations until we just see something that we like, maybe something like that, and then of course just pressing F12 will allow us to get that as a result. In the future, of course, we want to refine the system into something that's a little more interesting for the goals that I'm going for, but this is definitely a fantastic start in the direction of having a blank light generator. So back in the day, before we had the Hops button to be our indicator button, we had this logo. So once I enable it, you probably won't see it, but it's right here. And back in the day, this was kind of our indicator button to just kind of indicate statuses in Hops, which is not actually used for that anymore. In fact, a couple of times the discussions came up to actually remove it, but lately I've become a big fan of this button, of this older Hops drawing logo that you could stick on screen and just keep up permanently. And this button really didn't do a whole lot. It was just an indicator of just letting you know if your shape was an undefined shape, which is gray, or a bowl shape, which is a shape that gets a different cue menu. So if we go in Box Cutter and we just draw a box after selecting the shape, and we press L for live, and we select the shape, you can see that the logo's green. And we added preferences for people to be able to adjust the opacity of it whenever it's in this green state, but it never really had much of a purpose beyond that. So because of a recent resurgence and interest in the logo, which I was always a big fan of, I've just been making it humongous on my screen as just a way of being sarcastic. But on this side, we can see that now I'm running the latest version. And as I use Box Cutter, you can see that the logo will now change colors according to the state. I can press X and jump it over to Slice. I can press X again and jump it over to Inset. Press T and adjust my thickness, and the logo is just a little more indicative. So it's something that's just a little bit more experimental. Of course, this is something that I'm not recommending to anyone. It's just there as just a way of enhancing the old version. Coed put a little bit of work into making a Box Cutter version of the logo that it never went to use, so it just kind of hit me, why not just put that thing to work and actually make it an indicator for Box Cutter to just help it be a little more assistive. So if it's able to help you, then I'm interested to see what other ideas you have for it. But there's more purposes and plans that I have for this logo going forward, but having it be indicative of Box Cutter being in action is definitely useful, especially in cases where you're possibly working and the computer's slow and you're not sure if you applied the operation or it finished. So it's actually set up to only show up if Box Cutter is flagged to be running. So at the moment that the execute is complete, it switches back over to Hops, which is exactly the way I figured a collaborative logo like this would be. A concept I also would like to introduce to Hops is the concept of opt-ins, which is, funnily enough, the more I type it in code, the more it sounds like options. But if you expand the Hops button, there's a star icon which will take you to the opt-ins, and these are things that I felt users would possibly want to opt in or opt out of, or possibly make changes based on their personal preferences of wanting to use Hops. And these are basically things that you can adjust in your preferences, but I'll go over each of them one by one. So the first one is the background color. So me personally, I love having my background color to something strange because it's just funny. Sometimes it cheers me up whenever I'm working to just have all my modals be pink. So if that's something that you would opt to change, you can do that here. You can also opt to just have no color whatsoever and run in what I call predator mode, which is a nice way to just kind of run things to me. So I will give it just a little bit of transparency. The next thing is operator text display. So if I were to select this cube and press Q, or press Q and choose sharpen, it will display some information as far as what sharpen has just done. If you are such a pro user that you don't need that information, you can just opt out of that quickly by just having it run just like classic, where it doesn't display any information. To me, I feel it's a little lonely, so that is why the operator text exists, to convey this information more to you as well as provide stats to me, because I just find it interesting to know how many mods I applied, how many mods are left, what angle I just put, and without having to read another tooltip window, I feel I'm able to move a little bit faster. Help scale is another one. Sometimes you'll find that you're working in a view where the help is just way too big. So sometimes over the course of some demos, I will lower this down to something like 0.7, which will make it where the modal help is just a little bit smaller. Sometimes this can help with retina displays if you're working on a surface. However, on this display, one is working just fine. Over time, users have shown to have issues with our 0.7 preference, which we find to be a little bit better at avoiding certain sharpening catches with the bevel at 30 degrees, which is why we have a preference for it. But if you're the type of user who wants to use it as if it were vanilla, you can of course come in and set this to 0.5, which will result in you pressing Q and beveling and getting a 0.5 result by default every time. However, I do of course enjoy having this at 0.7, which is why it's set by that by default. It's something we agreed on years ago and just have become used to. Sometimes new users will come in and think that, using the modals and moving the mouse to the left and to the right is a little bit illogical. And these users I consider to be, I guess, right-handed users. So we have made improvements with our control system to make it where if you're a right-handed user, you can come in and just opt to have it actually work backwards if you want it to get smaller as you move to the left and bigger to the right. However, I've actually been using it so long that the moment this change was introduced to me, I was jarred by it and was like, we have to get this out immediately. But after more contemplation, we realized that it simply just needs to be delegated to a toggle for users who prefer such methods. The new array system has caused a degree of controversy. However, we of course are gathering all those comments and suggestions in order to build a stronger, better array. However, at this time, if you are wanting to opt for the classic array in the Q menu, you can just change that from here from ST3 to default, which will result in you being able to array using the classic version where you move the mouse and it had mouse wrap. However, after using ST3 array long enough, I have found that this is kind of a step backwards. So in the event that you are wanting to try them out interchangeably, you're able to do so through this opt-in right here. So we'll go back to ST3 and I can already just at least enjoy being able to move this precisely, scale in and out, get my view just right, and just get this array exactly the way I want, as well as tab into the experimental expanded mode, which we still plan on expanding down the road. In addition to that, there's been a contingency of users that have had an issue with the circle being an element. Circle was actually kind of a debug thing that ended up making it into the final version. However, we should have probably removed it or at least shrunk it down to a smaller size in order to minimize the confusion with it. So for that reason, you can also choose to have the circle be a dot. And this is something that really is just a scale of the circle, but it looks like a dot in the view and just sticks with the cursor. So maybe this will help you, make your way around this a little bit better. However, we do plan on making some improvements in regards to the ST3 array system. However, I still opt to use ST3 and just keep it as circle. So I'll press Control N and make a new scene. And we've already talked about material scroll. So one of the changes that we discussed quite a bit that was a little bit questionable was the ability to have the materials generated by blank material be the same in the viewport as they are in your render material generation. So I'm using box cutter a little bit to make a few cuts, and we'll just select everything and press Control or Alt M in order to bring up the material submenu, and we will control click material scroll to just jump through material scroll, and you can see that these are just kind of random materials. If I press tab and jump over to render, you can see that, or look dev, you can see that the look dev results are a lot different. And if I press tab to jump back to solid, you can see that I'm still getting these kind of candy colors, and this is a way that I like to work, because when I'm looking at it in the viewport, I'm looking at things in a little bit more abstract than the render, so I don't want to actually get those two things connected. However, if I were to select everything and at least put a bevel on everything, you know, maybe lower it down a little bit, and we can go under modifier and just hit weighted normal to fix the shading. We can toggle blank mapping similar in the viewport, and if I press Alt M and we control click material scroll, you can see that the materials are a lot truer to what the result would be if I looked at it in render. And while this does look cool, I find that looking at some of these very dark shaded materials in my viewport is just a little too dark for my taste, and having the reflective values be so variable can just kind of offset me a little bit. So that is why the opt-in option for blank matte similar to viewport exists. So by just toggling that off, we can just go back through our material scroll and go back to just getting the candy colored materials that you probably all know and love. The next one I want to talk about is radial twist render edit toggle. So this one has been improved. Some users might already be familiar with it because they were the ones who requested it. So by default, with this thing off, what it means is that if I were to take this object and give it a twist 360, we look at the modifiers in the control tilde, we can see that all the renders are turned off. And what this means is that I can immediately just go in and just start box cutting without any regard to sorting going haywire. And this was kind of just a temporary hack I put in just to help me make it through the day on a particular project. However, users have found this to be a little bit problematic. So as a result, and also I kind of really messed this mesh up here, I should probably delete these sides at least to make the mesh manifold, and then it's solid. And then I could shift click in order to roll the sharpening down, if I were talking about how to fix this, by the way. But some users don't actually want to work this way. Some people don't want to tab into edit mode and see the mesh at the same time as they're modifying it like I'm doing here. I can just kind of modify it and just tab back into object and just see those results take place. So alternatively, you have the option to turn this off or turn this on, which will bypass the render edit mode toggle behavior that I particularly enjoyed. And so if we were to go in and use a twist 360 again, you can see that when I tap into edit mode, you only see the real object. So there is a chance you could go in and bevel the wrong side. You know, maybe it's the right side depending on the type of designer you are, but it is a preference. And if we press Control tilde, we can look at the helper and look at our modifiers. We can see that all of the renders are on, meaning that if I were to box cut this, the sorting could have a chance of going haywire, but that is a risk that you have to take whenever you have it set up to be in a logical rendered way. But now at least whenever you render, you don't have to go in and make sure the renders are on for your radial array if that's something that you opt into. So the next one I want to talk about is 2cam jump. So previously, we added the ability to kind of create a camera that you could create that would orbit your scene. And this was to replace the long workflow of creating drivers and all of that and talking about drivers all the time and just having a section of workflow and videos talking about drivers. Instead, you can just have no object selected, press Q, and just choose add camera, and it will jump you into camera, and it will even select your camera, so you can press GZZ and actually get your camera just how you want. And then when you press Control Spacebar, it will just play your 360 animation. So some users may not want to actually jump into the camera and make it the active camera. So 2cam jump is something that's able to be turned off, and whenever you just add a camera, it will just add it, and then you can just jump into it and modify it whenever. And that's just in the event that you want to, you know, work on that angle on the side, you know, manually, and just get the camera exactly the way you want before you get in and begin adjusting things. So the next one in the list is the viewport set render. And this one is a favorite of mine, but I found that maybe having it on could be problematic, and that is that whenever you're pressing Alt-VV and you're jumping through your HDRs, you may want to not have to press R in order to set it to your render afterwards. Maybe you just want to press Alt-VV, set this to be the way that you want it to look, and just click to apply and just be done. So that is what the final opt-in here, Viewport plus set render. By having this on, we can press Alt-VV, and you can see that 2 renders already set to true, so no matter what I do here, and you can also see that my memory isn't jumping up very high because I'm not having to deal with crazy large HDRs. I can just click to apply, and if we look at this in a render, we can see that everything's set for the render as far as HDR and the rotational accuracy and everything according to what I was just looking at in the look dev. And for me, this supercharges my ability to set up renders on the fly because I can quickly just take this cube, roll it through materials until I find a combination I like, and that's not a combination. I want something on a little bit on the darker side. I can press Q, add lights, just scroll through until I find a rig that I like. Press Shift A, maybe add a plane instead. Actually, let's delete that cube. We'll S80, G-1, give this a blank material, and that is basically all I need in order to set up a quick render. Just using the system, I could just press Alt-V, go back and look dev, change it to something else if I want something a little bit more dramatic, because I have so many HDRs I've collected over time. Like I said, just check out SIBL and get on that, but I'm pretty sure you'll just have a pretty nice collection, scroll through them, and I could just click, and then going over to render, I can see that I immediately have the result that I want for whenever I press Control F12 and just quickly render these things out. ST3 can best be described as a man looking to make a mark. And every time I talk to him, I'm like, hey man, you should take some time off. You're making too many marks. But his work continues, and his impact with Hardops continues to grow. I'm so proud of the work that he has contributed to this version and the previous versions since being with us. He is rapidly growing on me. So without further ado, we'll select this cube, tap into edit mode. I'll press 3 to go into face mode. We'll select these 2 faces, and I'll press Q. And under ST3 Mesh Tools, we see an option here called Selection to Boolean. And if we select it, we can see it jump the selection to be a Boolean. And if I press F9, we can actually change the inset depth before tabbing out of edit mode and seeing what this result is, which is a face selection being turned into a Boolean. So at the time of its creation, I was like, that's an interesting concept. I wonder what we could use it for. So as we played with it more and more, we found that it definitely had a place in the Hardops workflow. So now it is a tool that you're now able to be testing out today. I'm pleased to announce that, we still have a few ideas on table. The moment I saw it, I was like, what about making it more modal? A modal version would definitely have a lot more to it as far as interactivity. However, as I played with this, I was having quite a good time with it. So I definitely recommend giving it a shot. Of course, all the tools I'm about to show are somewhat experimental. For the next example, we'll just get a new cube in here. I'll select this face on the side, and we'll Shift S, snap the cursor, and wrong side, we'll snap the cursor to this side, look at it from the front, and we'll Shift A, add a curve. And all of these tools were kind of mesh experimentations by ST3, just over the course of just dealing with things and learning his way around B-Mesh. So, there was no particular path in mind for it. Usually with all new guys, I want them to, kind of fix up a legacy tool. So if you've been following Hardops for a long time, a lot of the things that are being fixed up are like some of the oldest things. So we'll select the curve, select the cube, kind of weird saying that, and we'll press Q, and we'll choose curve extrude. And we can see now that we are able to extrude this along the curve, which is something that I'm still figuring out exactly what I want to use this for or what its purpose is. But the moment I saw it, I was just playing around with it and just creating all sorts of interesting shapes, just getting in here and just playing with different profiles. And it was just interesting seeing kind of what the tool could come up with. Here we are, just simple extrusions, curve extrude. We can go in and adjust our segments if we're trying to get something very smooth. Even play with the smooth factor and the smooth repeat in order to get this curve to be just as smooth as we need it, just in case we're having transitional issues. It took me a moment to set that up, but just to show that in action. In addition to that, flattening is something that it turns out is kind of basic rudimentary 101 of B-mesh creation. So for that reason, we always had a flatten before that would just flatten things to an axis. So it was kind of illogical. It was more like me pressing SX to do these operations. Now I'm happy to announce that we have a proper flattening, which Mesh Machine also has a flatten. So we were initially concerned about these sort of things. However, we are more than happy to share the solution with them as well. These are just little experiments, no direct impact intended with these things. Of course, this tool is capable of doing so much more. However, of course, our end goal is to get the finest shading possible. So at some point we will have to solve that. However, internally I do discuss that I would like to solve it in a way that doesn't involve using data transfer or some sort of like hard override of normals, but it's definitely something that I want to solve for good and for everyone, so that way we can finally have that true CAD arcade experience. But being able to flatten things to a face is something that, you know, I never really mess with in my work. You know, I could always press Y and bring up Mesh Machine. I just never flatten faces for some reason. It's just not my line of work. However, just being able to you know, quickly do it is now a thing. And of course you can press F9 and change your algorithm for the alignment method. There's supposed to be a third one being added to it as well, but these are, like I said, little experimentations by ST3 as far as just seeing things you could change as far as on the hop side. Of course, I still want a dynamic version of great neural and face and panel just on the fly. I feel that these things would be quite useful. In fact, they were made so long ago. In a way, I feel like the versions that I see now kind of are that, except I wanted a custom profile support and stuff, so it could really be very useful in terms of selections. But over time, I've used these so little that I've stopped thinking about them as far as my tasking when it comes to hops itself. So back to these tools. So the next one is align to face, which this one is a little more complicated. So this is the first take of me attempting to show this. So what I will do is just Shift A, add a cube, and we'll just kind of rotate it all crazy. And I will shift select the first object and we'll tab into edit mode. And I will select 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. And we can press Q and choose align to face. And it's the wrong order. Do we orient it correctly? No, did it terribly. Gonna have to undo that. Alright, so we select this one, then select this one. And so we'll select 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, Q, align the face. And we see that it solved oddly. So we'll uncheck this one. Flip edge 1, flip edge 2, turn off flip edge 1, and more than likely it's this one that we turn. But you can kind of see the idea of what ST3 was going for with this particular tool. It's like a type of alignment system that in addition we could also place the cursor at the pivot, and I believe also fix the OBJ transform so that the origins of the objects, nope, the origin needs to be reset here. But the idea was to create some sort of mesh orientation system. So these things are just little experiments that I believe still require a little bit of input from you, the user, as far as what direction it should go, if any at all. I mean, there is really no purpose in them. They were just kind of part of ST3's work as far as learning B-mesh and getting acquainted with some of the other aspects of Blender that some of us on the team have just been kind of ignoring, so that he could find a more unique niche. You know, sometimes when people look at things, they feel like everybody has their own thing. Like, you know, Bongiorno had his thing with the viewport rotate, and then it became loosing, and then material scroll, and then Proxy, of course, has box cutter. So the goal is to always find someone a unique angle to work on as well, instead of just letting them become the UI guy or the mesh tool guy or something like that, to have people jump around and be varied in order to help them grow, and try to also have them collaborate with others on the team to create things even more unique or expansive than the initial ideas. So with this shape, if we press Q and we go under operations, we can look at ToShape, and by hovering over ToShape we can look at the tooltip, and you can see that there's a new option where if you control click ToShape, it will parent the selection to empties, and it will give an empty to each part of the selection, just in case you're ever needing to parent things to empties in order to deal with things. Sometimes this comes up in a situation where you're rigging a keyboard or something like that, but just know that now ToShape has the ability to deal with empties as well. Alright, so for reasons unknown, in the previous version of Hardops, if you were to go under add modifier and you add a screw, there was no intermediate adjustment of things between, 1 and the next whole number. Even if you hold shift, you're still moving things on this stepped method, and there's no way to actually move things in between. And it's not something that comes up very often, but it was something that was driving me crazy. So now we're running the latest version of Hardops, and if we were to just delete half that plane, you will see that now when we go under add modifier and screw, we can actually move it on the finer increments and then hold control in order to snap to 1, which is something that just made a lot more sense. I apologize for the inconvenience of that being a situation before, but now you're able to adjust things a lot smoother whenever you're inside the screw modal, if that's something that happens to become a situation. So destructive material scroll is one of those things I was quite excited about, and to show it in action I'll press Alt M, and if we just do a material scroll, we're just changing the material on this particular model that we have selected. However, if we press Alt M and we actually hover over this and look at the tooltip, you can see that shift click will activate destructive material scroll. And so by shift clicking this, we can now scroll through, changing all the material indices of this by changing the nodes inside. So by combining this with the ability to press C for color, we can now just scroll through endless color combinations of various ways of looking at this particular model. And the cool thing, of course, is that we can press V to jump over to viewport adjust, and press S and A in order to get things just right, and just really just set up our render and our model just on the fly. In this case, I don't have to render activated, so what that means is I will need to press R in order to enable to render, and we just jump through our lighting presets till we find one that we like, and voila, we have now configured our render. And if I press F12, that is exactly the result I should have been looking at here. And I bet it's because of something with these collections being enabled that aren't supposed to be enabled. So better luck next time, I guess. But that is close enough. Another example I'd like to show is this handheld done from a while back that was set up for a render by General Ginsu. And I actually have this piece selected in the back, which is its own separate object. And if we press Alt M and we shift click to go into destructive material scroll, you can see me replacing all the indices at the same time that were formerly connected to that particular material. And if we press C, we can actually start scrolling through colors, which I just love scrolling through until I find a color that's fun and adventurous, that reminds me of outside. And we'll go ahead and click to apply. And now I'm selecting the body itself, which you can see the object is still live. And we can shift click to jump through material scroll again, and we're just changing it through combinations of metal, affecting all the objects that are similar in the material selection as far as our block-in process. So this is kind of that character customization feeling that I'm going for and hoping to create, where you can really just get your model together and just really customize the render and just get a very fine result very fast. Even though the material panel is hiding off on the side, I can hold shift and scroll up to jump to the second material, which will let me begin changing the other one. So it looks like both of them are actually the same material, so the list on the side isn't handy. So if you're copying me and using the Modo theme, make sure to configure your prefs to have your mod panel off by at least 60, and then save the prefs. Don't be like me. But I just wanted to emphasize just some of the improvements that have come with this latest material scroll and how you can use it to quickly change the look of an entire asset just by using blank material for your material blocking process and then using material scroll destructively for really configuring that final look. Also, I'm happy to announce that measures have been taken towards making the modifier stack more useful. You can see it over in the bottom left corner of the screen while I'm inside this bevel modal, where you can see the angle indicated instead of it saying bevel, bevel, or boolean, boolean, or whatever it was saying before, which was just not informative enough. For the goal of our release to be more informative, adjustments had to be made. So now we have a slightly more informative system going on with the modifier panel. However, I do aim to adjust and make it even more informative in the future. However, I do hope that this will please users as we are beginning to take steps in that direction. Over the course of this release, it was fun to open up old files and just kind of jump things into render and just see how things turned out. So, we look at look dev, looks kind of terrible. We go to render mode, and of course we're in cycles because cycles was the thing back in the day. But if we just jump this over to Eevee as well, we see that this is kind of the result that we have so far. And if we jump over to look dev, this is what we have so far. So nothing wrong with that. However, I do love being able to press Alt V and then V again, and then switching out the environments till I find something I like, and then wondering, something's missing from the way the shading is looking, and then pressing W in order to jump to EVHQ, and then seeing, all that local reflection goodness instead of having to go into preferences and turn that stuff on. So once I have something I like here, I can press R, click, and this is my render result when I jump over to the render side, aside from the blur and the depth of field, which continues to drive me crazy. Every time I look at it from the jump, I'm like, oh man, I wish I could just really render look dev. But just something about look dev just reminds me of a photo shoot from school, and I just can't stop just pressing Alt V, V, and then W to jump it to LQ and HQ. That is pretty much what it looks like with all the bells and whistles turned off if I wanted things to be fast on the performance. And then W if I really want to jump those settings up. My settings are at 2048 because I really don't want to crush it too bad. But it is nice being able to see what kind of render results I'm getting just by playing with the look dev and just jumping it over without having to do much of anything else. Part of Mirror's initial jarring with users was that it was rather complex compared to the previous version, even though it offered so many improvements that it immediately needed to replace the old one. So if we jump into Mirror by pressing Alt X, you can see that now the mirror will let you know when an empty is created. For example, if we were to use the hotkeys at the bottom, we see that there's a hotkey for A, S, W, and X. So if we press A, we can toggle through the multiple types of modifier modes, and now you can see that there's a notification system notifying you when you change your mode what is about to happen. So this will let you know that a new modifier is being created. We can press S to cycle through our pivot points, where we can see what kind of pivot points we can get with our mirror. We can also press W in order to cycle between the different types of orientation. So if we want to just quickly jump this over to view, we can, and just mirror it across, and we see that it's mirrored. If we were to go back into mirror, you can see that it's already pre-configured to go back in the same type of system it was before. But let's say I didn't want to do that. Let's say I wanted to add a new mirror. I would press A to switch this from modifier to new modifier. I would press X to make this default, and then maybe press A to make this new modifier, and I can actually mirror this in addition to the mirror being done from view. But what's important is that now if you're looking at the top, it will let you know if an empty is about to be created, in which case an empty will always be created if you're using anything besides local and active origin. Anything else will definitely create an empty in order to make that type of mirror pivot possible. My goal always is to have you, the customers, kind of current with what I'm dealing with internally. Anytime we are looking at something that is potentially game changing and we just sit there and stare at it for months and months, I feel kind of terrible. So, every morning I wake up and I do this kind of tool test just with box cutter and Hardops, just a little box test. So we'll start off and we'll just hit bevel and just kind of run through this hops. So, starting out with hops, the easiest way to get started is to just select a cube and press Q. And you could just start off with bevel, roll the bevel up real nice. And then we could, from here choose to stack another bevel. And for this reason, step has been promoted up the list because step has been improved over the last couple of versions to be better in this new age where we can now add a 50% bevel on top. And what this means is whenever I go in and box cut, this cut will immediately be put on the next bevel level. And I can select this piece, press Q, go under operations, quickly step it, and just do another cut. And this is, like I said, this is kind of a daily regimen I do just to kind of test the tools and make sure the tools are doing what they're supposed to be. In fact, once this test is complete, then I feel that I'm free to begin playing with the other parts of Hardops and begin pushing the limits and start making the more troublesome assets that I love to test myself as a conundrum of. In fact, lately we've been talking a lot about sub-D modeling and how to kind of reacquaint people with it because people might have gotten the wrong impression from our views on subdivision. It's not that we're against subdivision, it's that you really can't put a subdivision after a boolean, and I'm sure most people actually know that. So we're just going through and just doing cuts and just adjusting things on the fly, seeing just kind of what we're able to get from each bevel level. I'll go ahead and step that shape instead, which will drop it down one more level and give me a manageable, more isolated bevel that I can begin tweaking. And Box Cutter has also received a small update, which anyone using Box Cutter daily probably noticed that the 3D cursor was out for a split second. And that's because we had a correction to kind of help fix new users on this latest release, but the fix was actually too good and actually made it where the 3D cursor system was no longer able to be used, which made us process it incorrectly as it no longer needing to be a thing. And it turned out that AR was probably the biggest fan of 3D cursor that ever lived. So now I'm happy to announce that things are back on track. The goal of the last couple of Box Cutter releases have been to mainly get rid of bugs and things. And, this latest hops, this 985 era, has been to create a version of Hardops that can begin having tutorials taught about it that could be very self-contained and explain the tool the way that we intend it, because our goal is to remove keystrokes. In fact, as we began calculating the keystrokes that are saved with every action that we do with our tools, it became apparent that our value as a tool has increased dramatically with every iteration, because our goal is to simply make the tool easier to use. And through the complaints and criticisms that we receive, we're able to further refine the sauce and the formula to get a result that is a lot more applicable to the next person coming in. So we do a lot of changes on the daily to ensure that everything is flowing exactly as it's supposed to. So just creating something like this, just a moment, but it's my favorite way to start my day. In fact, you guys are probably getting tired of me doing videos just talking about, going to Box City. But the trip to Box City is a trip where you can really see the tools in a nutshell in a self-contained universe as far as what their intended results is supposed to be when they're used optimally. Of course, when you begin adding complications like curves and whatnot, then you have to begin thinking more dynamically, which is where certain lessons come into play. And for that reason, I recommend Gleb's latest course, which definitely covers more intermediate topics than his previous course, which was more of a basics fundamental thing. But now I feel that it's definitely at a level that all users should be able to grasp. So continuing on, we're going to select everything, press Alt-M, and just control-click to just jump through blank material scroll, and we don't even see what results we're getting. So we could press Tab to jump into render, and my goal is to get just, mainly silver, no white. And so that is actually a pretty good result. And we'll just insert a plane, press S, 80, G, -1, and we can select this plane and press Alt M and then Control click to just scroll through its combinations to get the ultimate result. With nothing selected, we can press Q and choose Add Camera. So now we have a camera that we could press G, Z, Z in order to zoom with. And we'll just press Control Spacebar, let it get a good vantage angle. And we'll press Alt VV in order to look through our HDRs. And I will just pick one that really just suits this particular cube. Every cube is different to me, but I just love going through and setting the render to true and clicking and knowing that when I jump over to render, it's definitely going to look exactly like the look depth because the background isn't visible. But the next thing from here is possibly the lights could use adjustment. So by pressing Alt A to deselect and pressing Q, we can just add a quick light rig and just scroll through combinations until we get the right amount of lights that we want. We can press C to just toggle the color and just change what kind of result we're getting. So maybe something like that, a little more sanitized. And then we can press numpad plus and minus in order to adjust the brightness as well as certain settings with the lights. So I definitely recommend spending some time getting acquainted with the plus and minus of this because you can really get your look just right. And we just press F12 and within 6 minutes we have made it to Box City, which has always been the goal of this tool, is to just take you on a nice little journey, a nice little adventure to just really show you what this tool is about. And with the speeds that we're hitting now, you know, really I feel that our work is nearing to being done with this particular iteration of Hardops. So we definitely have a few more things that I would like to accomplish with this as far as getting us all the way to the goal. I mean, this is only a box, but definitely on this trip to Box City, that particular arc is getting closer to completion with every update that we put forth. So I hope that you enjoyed this video and I'll see you guys next time. And to end this segment, we will just click play and just let this play. And of course, we'll use the power save drop down and I'll save this as QBox and it will auto increment it to be QBox 98, meaning I've run through this test 98 times in order to ensure that it gets to the intended result. And with that, we can now close this.